Welcome to Ethos Effect Podcast.
Welcome to the Ethos Effect Podcast. After building and learning from failures,
We discovered our ethos and leveraged it
to scale, sell, and build again our seven-figure businesses.
whether you're starting out or leveling up.
This podcast is your source for innovation and lasting impact. Today we had on Kristy Swegheimer. She's the founder and CEO of Redbrick Insights, and she is a human capital strategist.
Loved her story. Really connected with a lot of the thoughts she had on human resources, building a company, building a culture, building a brand. Like that used to sound ridiculous to me, like building culture.
It did.
Like it sounded kind of silly, but after we had kind of gone through our internal rebranding exercise to ethos benefits, that whole process made me kind of understand because, we had an identity of the business, but the employees didn't.
Mm-hmm.
And she kind of deals with that, and she deals with mergers and acquisitions, growing companies, just kind of right in line with our industry and what we do, working so closely with human resources every day.
Yeah, she differentiates herself by really being a proponent of the business, right? And the human capital needs meet the business needs versus, we've had the privilege of working and consulting and having a peek in hundreds of businesses across the country. And you see some that are very clearly using their human capital to execute on a business strategy. But then you have some that are responding maybe a little bit chaotically to employee needs and seeing it as a problem that just needs to be dealt with on the daily as opposed to an avenue to execute a strategy.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, it's not easy. She's grown companies from 100 to 1,000 plus.
Mm-hmm.
Not an easy thing to do, especially to do more than once. And now to be able to help other companies. Really cool story. Great conversation. And I'm excited to see where she takes her own business because that's a newer venture with her. And there's no doubt she'll go far with it. So
let's get into it. Welcome to this week's episode of the Ethos Effect Podcast. You've got your host, Donovan, and myself, and we've got Kristy Swegheimer, founder of Redbrick Insights, here with us today. Thank you for being here, Kristy.
Thank you for having me.
We're so excited to talk. Kristy and I actually got connected because a current client of ours was looking to elevate their HR game, and she was referred to me. Going through her history and her resume, I was like, absolutely blown away. And I'm like, we need her on the podcast. So Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Do you want to just give our listeners a little catch up of kind of what you did before, what you're doing now?
Yeah, sure. So I'm, kind of a corporate HR person. I spent really 20 plus years in the corporate space. And I started actually in staffing services. So I love to joke about it. I was like in the 90s knocking on doors with everybody and their brother,
Wow.
knocking on those doors. But a lot of those lessons I took when I went into the corporate space, right? Treating clients and having that kind of relationship. But I went into the corporate space and I led HR teams for just about 2 decades and then left corporate and came to do my own thing. Left and, decided to try Redbrick Insights.
Okay. So Redbrick Insights, can you tell me a little bit about the name?
Sure. So I was struggling trying to figure out a name because I didn't want it to be
super hard. That's why I asked.
We've been there.
It's a painful process.
It is a painful process. And I didn't want it to be just like HR consulting, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's just more to it.
Mm-hmm.
And what I'm bringing to the table, I'm very kind of a business first mindset. And so I wanted to be a more than just HR functionality. And so my daughter and I and my fiance as well, we're throwing around all kinds of names, but we're driving down. I live in Winter Park and it's, the red brick roads everywhere. Yeah. And we're driving down there and she was like, what about the red brick roads? Why do they even have these? And I'm like, oh my goodness, that's it right there.
Nice.
The kind of the strength and stability, the functionality of it, although it's really not, right? It is a pain in the butt to drive on it for sure.
They stand the test of time though.
They do stand the test of time.
Yeah.
And so that was the idea behind it, is figuring out, it's Redbrick Insights. We're going to offer a little bit more than just human resources consulting. There's also insights and availability for, business management functionality too. Okay.
So you kind of gave away a little bit of it there, but how would you describe your firm? Because you're not really like, you're more than a human resources consultant. You kind of alluded to that. So how do you kind of explain that to prospective clients or people when you're
Yeah,
chat with them.
the way that I look at the human capital side of what I do is really just being a business person first, right? Understanding how the business runs and operates, the why, the how, the financials. And then we think about then how do we use the people side of it, the human capital, to run the business more effectively. So it could be anything. So I work with clients that might be looking to sell their businesses. And so I might, assign them with a PE firm or an investment banker to help them from that perspective. Maybe it's on the other side where we're working on, they've just been purchased. And now we're thinking, okay, how do we now go from, we just were purchased by PE. What does that mean for all of our employees? And now it's a very different mindset for how we report our numbers. Right? How do you sit in front of a board and explain what it is that we do as an organization, from an executive team? From a human resources standpoint, you need to take that HR person and kind of elevate them, right? It's not just, tracking recruiting retention numbers. That's one piece of it for sure. But then how does that actually play into the whole business organizational growth mindset? So it's anything along those ways.
Yeah.
So I can help sell them or build them.
I love that. I really want to get into like M&A and that in a little bit deeper, because I think a lot of the times at least from what we've seen, the human capital side is usually the last piece that's considered in the transaction when it should probably be a little bit sooner. But nonetheless, I want to make sure our listeners understand some of the amazing things you've done, like growing companies during your 20 years. So can you tell us a little bit about that? I know there was significant growth in the companies that you worked with, and you were managing that human capital strategy, right?
Yeah, exactly. So the first kind of corporate role I had was with a financial services company. And when I started, we were about 150 employees. And when I left 11 years later, we were 1,200.
Wow.
That's huge growth. And that was both organic and inorganic, right? We, the majority of it during the first several years was all organic. And then at the end, we started acquiring companies and merged with another firm. And then the second firm was about 200 to 900 employees. And again, then we were purchased by private equity 2 different times, changed hands, started acquiring other companies as well. But the organic growth and going through that change is, if you think about it, I've seen it.
Yeah.
So it's super fun. I love that aspect of it. And I would say there's not one piece of HR I haven't touched for sure, because you're growing those teams. You start as a department of 1 or 2. And, and my last one I had 15 people reporting to me at the end. So big differences.
On the organic growth side, so for businesses that are listening and maybe they've been capped, whether it's 100, 500 employees or even smaller, 30, 40, and they want that kind of hockey stick growth, right? Like they want that organic growth to happen. From the human capital side, what do you think is the most important thing for these businesses to consider before that happens?
Who they are. Like, what is their vision, purpose, mission? Who is it that they want to be? Because that's what you then need to start aligning the people to. Right? You can create a recruiting strategy aligned to your vision and goals. Or what is your first year goal? What is your 10-year goal? You start a recruiting strategy aligned with those things. And you have to start thinking outside the box.
Yeah.
It's not just posting a job and hiring, right? I mean, I think if most people know that nowadays for sure, but there are so many different ways to think about how you bring talent on for your end goals. And so I think focusing on that is the first step.
So kind of like the piece where the employees are genuinely aligning with the company's thoughts and initiatives, basically is what you're saying.
Yeah. And you won't always get everybody there for sure, but you should have a plan to do it. You should, if you don't have a mission and vision for your company, how are you bringing in the right people?
Yeah,
you're going to be spinning
what
your
I've seen
wheels.
is if you don't, they set the agenda and all of a sudden you're looking around your business, you're like, what is going on here?
Yeah.
100%.
That was something we did a few years ago and it's been amazing because, I don't think we knew that's why we were doing it, but we realized hey, we have in our head the idea of who we are as a business.
Yeah.
But the employees couldn't certainly not repeat it, right? You know what I mean? They wouldn't know exactly what we were thinking.
Well, and in that,
as we did it, things started to change very, very quickly.
Yeah.
But at the beginning of a business, you're just so, at least we were growing so fast and it was so exciting. There were so many sales happening, right?
Yeah.
And then you kind of, like Donovan said, you all of a sudden are like, why is everything so hard? And you kind of look around and you're like, oh shit, I wasn't intentional about who we are, our culture, our values, the way that I hired, the way that I onboarded. And like he said, we did a huge deep dive into that process. We hired a company to take us through this whole branding expression and figuring it out. We did a complete rebrand of our business, completely rehired and went through an entire new training protocol, got a ton of coaching, and it has honestly been transformational. Like, I think when I look back at the last 4 or 5 years, that is the reason for the catalyst growth. So it's actually mirroring exactly what you just said, which is no shocker there. You're the expert. But
I think that grit can get you through a lot in the beginning,
Mhm.
and but you'll tap out. Right.
Yes.
You're only going to get to here. So then you got to think differently about, okay, what did I miss along the way, or what new things do I need to put in to make sure I'm getting to that next step? And to your point, you might lose some people along the way.
Yeah. And that's okay. Yes.
Yeah.
And that's okay for them, you know? And I think like something that I've really taken to heart in the talent acquisition process is just transparency of this is who we are. And you know, I think in the beginning, it's really easy to want to sell everybody that you're the best employer in the world, right? Yeah. And why would you not want to work for us? Like, you know, but then you get to a point where you're like, you know, you do these exit interviews and you start to hear feedback. Like for us, it was the volume's high. You guys are intense. Like you really believe in what you do, right? like we have a saying in our business. It's like the job starts when someone tells you no. Like the moment a carrier tells one of our clients no, or an employee gets turned down.
Not in sales, more in service.
Oh, yes. On the service
when you say
side.
that, sometimes I'm like, that sounds like awful.
No, I don't force people to do business
sales
with us.
tactics, man.
No, on the service side, right? Like, because there's just so many barriers to the healthcare experience for employees, and we are fierce advocates for them. Yeah. But not every personality on a service team is up for that kind of a fight.
Sure.
Right. And just becoming really clear that like, this is who we are. This is how we recruit. It's been such a game changer.
Yeah.
So when you get brought into a company, you're coming in kind of as that human capital consultant, and are you trying to train and coach up their team? Or are you trying to work with the executives to point out initiatives? Like, I can imagine it can be almost a little contentious. You know, you're the HR director of a company, and then suddenly you come in. Is there a bit of a power struggle there, or how does that process usually kind of start to play out?
You know, I've been lucky so far that I have not had the power struggle, but I anticipate it always. And my first part is that I'm not here to take your job. Like I am only here to help supplement what you are already doing and help drive you to the next level. HR is, you know, like everybody, they're understaffed, right? Yes. So there's not not a lot of companies are like, oh, let's just overstaff in HR because that makes perfect sense, right? It's not till it gets to a certain point that people go back and do it. So it's nobody's fault, but they cannot focus on all those additional initiatives that you need to do. Think about upskilling or reskilling or, you know, skills-based hiring versus degree. You know, there's all kinds of initiatives out there. Well, you know, HR team that's doing the day-to-day functional stuff, it's hard to step outside of where they're doing and think about what does it mean to do this? How do I put a project plan together for that and get it moving along the line? And then also sometimes they've been there so long that sometimes these executive team is like, you can't do it. They probably can, but they don't always give them the right, you know, respect, if you will. So I work on both ends. I'll give you an example. I was at a client this week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday with a new client, and they're about 250 employees, so decent sized firm, and they've got an HR team. But the leadership team, we all sat in the room together for 3 days. So it was the CEO, the COO, and the head of HR. And we sat in a room and just, you know, you download, like, what are the issues? What's going on? Tell me about your value proposition. What does that mean? How do you, you know, tie that back? And then the CEO at the end of the session, I'm like, you know, so how did you feel? What did you think? You know I asked a ton of questions and I'm not trying to be pushy. It just helps. I have to understand the business. Yeah. I understand the business model, why you operate and how you even, you know, charge your clients. And he was like, this is so enlightening. I didn't realize how misaligned we were. Because again, to your point earlier, you're just going along and doing the things. Yeah. Totally. And so then he's like, I needed this like kick in the butt to say, now I need to really get in line.
So you're almost like a business therapist. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, sometimes.
I'm just joking.
No, I mean, it kind of is because like you're bringing those feelings of who you are as a business, which usually starts with the leaders, right? Or the founders, right? Like this is who we are as a business, and kind of taking those feelings. That's why it was such a painful process, the rebranding thing for me, because it's like taking feelings and like turning them into words to like tell other people about your feelings. And I was just like, it was so painful for me. I don't know why.
I think that's why we make a good partnership, but nonetheless.
But yeah, no, that's super interesting because I'm glad I'm not the only one that struggled with that.
You are definitely not. So again, both sides, both with the HR person and without. You know, I always walk in saying, again, I'm not here to take your job. Right. And most companies I work with already have an HR team.
Yeah.
Do you find, other than the values being expressed concisely and clearly to employees and it being weaved through the talent acquisition and retention process. Do you find that most of these businesses you go into have a similar problem?
No.
It's always very different?
I think everybody's something different, right?
Mm-hmm.
I would say the one thing that's generally consistent, and not only the companies I work with, but just other people that I know, is leadership effectiveness.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I mean, I think if you look at Gartner, it's still the number one issue that, employers face today is leadership effectiveness, whether you consider that training or, communication style, it encompasses both of them. So I think that is the biggest issue. And again, when you're coming from smaller company to larger company, what happens, right? You're promoting within.
Mm-hmm.
And so that training and development of how a leader then knows what to do and how to talk to an employee, how to talk about career development, how to, communicate the vision and, mission and the goals of the organization down through the lines. They just don't necessarily learn that right away. Or in my own space by financial services and engineering, guess what?
Yeah.
They're not always made to be leaders.
100%.
Some people are, but
Yeah.
it takes a different kind of breed to think through that.
I was going to say, yeah, those industries can have interesting personalities
Mhm.
that aren't always like
Very
that.
good and detailed.
Yeah.
Maybe not so soft skilled.
Mhm.
So if a business, like someone's listening today and they can't, or maybe they think they can't afford a consultant, they haven't developed like a culture of feedback within their organization, how would they know that their leadership effectiveness is a problem?
Oh, I think you'll know. I mean, if you start having turnover issues, right,
Mhm.
that data will tell you all kinds of things. What I tell most of my HR partners when I'm working with them is to take all the names off of exit interviews. If you're going to look at exit interviews or just turnover data,
Oh,
take
like
the
that.
names off.
that's interesting.
Now just start looking at the data, right? What does that data now tell you? Is it, maybe it's a specific region or a leader or a time of year or how long they've been employed or where do we hire? There's, a gazillion different ways you can slice and dice kind of turnover data. And then if you've got true like exit interviews, so if you have, data dump from it, great example is to bring in a temp. Bring in a third-party person, a temporary employee, and let them read through all that exit interview and restate what they think was the reason why they left. Because chances
Objective.
are, they don't know these people.
Yeah, they
So
don't
what
care.
the person wrote down was career development. Everybody leaves for career development. Nobody really leaves for career development, by the way, but everybody chooses that.
Because that's the safe one.
So-
it wasn't
so
that my
safe.
boss was an a-hole.
Right. But it could be, there's so many things. And so maybe the word benefit keeps coming up. Maybe they didn't have the right benefits. There's
Mm-hmm.
so many versions, but a third party then going back and now resource that data and look at, 3 months from now, go back. Does it tell you a different story? And then you can start creating plans that are a little bit more effective versus just what you think.
100%.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that.
I met with a team of Brigham University.
Mhm.
University.
Oh, yeah. Mhm.
And they were doing a survey, like they just needed like HR kind of professionals to talk about benefits specifically. And so she asked me, do you think benefits matters more on recruiting and retention or on the front end or retention? I'm like, retention all day long. Everybody has a benefit plan.
Yes.
Not
Mhm.
everybody, but most people, right? So people, when you're interviewing for a job, I think they take for granted that the benefits are good.
Absolutely.
But from a retention standpoint, they will leave in a hot second if you change something in their plan,
Yeah.
right? So
Absolutely.
I think that's also a different way to look at it too. It's making sure that you're increasing those benefits or at least, keeping them stable for people. But as soon as you take one thing away, even if it didn't matter to them, it's a huge impact.
We talk about that all the time.
Yeah.
Do you think so? Like, we have some clients, and I always feel like that's underutilized to where, like, I know how strong certain companies' benefit offering is.
hmm
And we try to, like, put that up front and for them for that purpose,
Sure.
for the recruiting purpose, because it's certainly not creating any problems on retaining employees, but it's like, I feel like you have an opportunity to use that. Is that something you ever see? Or, I mean, do employees coming in really, they're just considering the comp package, where this place is, what's the schedule like?
Flexibility.
Like, is it just too much info to take in when you're, coming in as a new person?
I think it's a lot to absorb the
Okay.
true value of it, unless it's of value to them for some specific reason.
Right. Like
Okay.
maternity benefits or adoption assistance. Yes.
Right. That might be a driving force for them of leaving their other employer.
Mhm.
But if it's kind of, everybody else's state of the run, I don't know that it makes again, they just don't pay as much attention to it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
They just make some assumptions that it's good. or they,
Well, and there's this article posted recently. There was a study done that I think it's either 51 or 59% of people have benefits envy of their colleagues, or not colleagues, of their friends, their family, and their friends. And everybody just has this assumption that like, oh, my friend that works for so-and-so, her benefits are so great, right? And there's just this like, and then when they were, pushed a little further, like, well, what's better about those benefits?
They have no idea.
They don't. They don't. And what's funny is like the ones that were picked were maternity, mental health, and I can't remember the last one. But nonetheless, it was stuff that's like, it's really hard to measure because, health plans cover maternity. Are you talking about fertility benefits and adoption assistance and family planning? Or, is it a lower deductible? Therefore, like there's just so many pieces to it. Is there a return to work program for after a mother delivers? What does that transition program look like? Like there's so many things that aren't necessarily like the insurance package, but more like the non-insurance employee experience, like PTO, flexibility, all of that stuff. I really feel like when I start thinking about HR, it's such an expansive field that to expect one person to understand and execute strategies for HR within a business and do it well and be the best is just, I
think that's why you have to find the right partners.
Yeah.
Right. And any good, strong HR partner will always tell you they're going to find the right partner to bring in. You know what you don't know. I haven't seen it, but I'm sure there's people out there who actually try to administer their own benefits, which seems crazy.
It is
to me, right? That's not, you can't be an expert in everything.
No.
Yeah.
Do you see often, like when we see a company that's really not performing, at least in our sector in the benefits, and they're just making like, it's gotten to the point where it's like painfully aware. What seems to be the difference is their human resources seems to be siloed a little bit from the executives. And I think also like the executives have stayed out of that decision, and then human resources is kind of making the decision for what they think is the best of the employees without the business considerations, right? They're not thinking about, what is this going to do? Like if with this trend, like can I continue another year or 2 years or 3 years?
For example, when facing a 30-something% increase, there was a prospect that the HR, said, well, we just need to start paying for spouses coverage now. What?
We need to start or stop?
Start. Yeah. Well, and
it goes case in point where
spouses are the most expensive person on the planet.
Sure. But her mentality was, well, if the cost is going to go up, we need to make the employees happy somehow. And I've had a few people ask me to cover spouses. So there's just such a disconnect, right, between like the business plan of a healthcare program and actually executing.
That's unfortunate.
Basically, HR,
exactly.
HR thinking. I always think of it this way: like it's like human resources in that particular condition, thinking my client is the employee and I'm just going to make the employee happy because that's my job. I'm in human resources. When in truth, I think like, the more successful HRs that we have with our clients or prospects, they kind of look at that decision-making process and think, employee, the stakeholders of the company, and then the clients, and like balancing that to make a decision fit.
I think you have to come from a business first mindset, because if the business is not profitable, you're not going to have any employees anyway.
Yeah.
Right.
Perfect.
So you have to start there, and you have to engage with your executive team, and then you have to offer the best benefits you can with the information and knowledge that you have from where the business is operating from. Right. If you're doing it backwards, it will, because then all this, what happens then next year, then you have to take it all away because your leadership team now says we can't afford it.
That's the worst thing.
Then your retention is going to be really off, right? Because if you'd started over here, softer approach. So I think you have to start from a business, and the CEO of any company should be involved in what the benefits are of their employees base, right? 100%.
Do you see that? Do you see that a lot that they're not? And if so, why do you think they're not?
Because they think of it as administrative. Like, we're just checking the box.
But it's a top expense.
And the other thing I think our industry, like our brokers, like have conditioned these companies to think that all you can do is pick 3 or 4 choices. So HR can be in charge of picking the least
worst
option, right? So it's almost like they've simplified the decision-making process enough to where they're like, I don't need to look at it.
Well, and they've also conditioned the employer and the HR teams to just accept that there's nothing you can do about these rising costs. We can jump to a different carrier. We can increase a deductible. We can skinny a network. But, this is the trend. There's nothing you can do when that's just
not true. Right.
Exactly. It's not true. So I think you're exactly right. That's why they've removed themselves. At what point do you see them start to care?
It probably depends on the business itself or when that line item becomes so expensive.
Yeah.
Right now, all of a sudden, you're looking at it from a financial perspective, like benefits is a third of our cost, or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
Well, let's look at that a little bit more.
And
then they start digging in, but then it's too late.
Well, that's exactly what we've noticed is by the time, that we're usually brought into a conversation, it's like, we need to do something about this now, even though we've been talking to them, planting these seeds for years that hey, you can control this cost and do what's best for the employees. It's not one or the other. And then it's like, okay, well, you mentioned 30% savings, like, let's make it happen now. And it's like, okay, sometimes we can, right? But sometimes it's, the plan's gotten so out of control that it's going to be just a slow multi-year process, but at least we're moving in the right direction.
Yeah. I think you have to think of it as I worked for one organization where our claims were extremely high. Mm-hmm. It just was part of the way that the employee base was run at that particular time. So when I came on board, it's like, well, you can't change it overnight. We need a 5-year plan because it was so high. Let's go self-insured. Well, how about not yet? Yeah. Let's get here, right? But again, you work that with your broker to find out what's going to be the best solution over time. Yeah. Right. And just know that you're, hopefully year over year getting less expensive without taking any benefits away.
I love that you said that because that's one of the first things we talk about because it's so often more of like a 60 to 90 day planning period. Oh, mm-hmm. It's okay, we're 3 months out, let's hurry up and make a decision. Yeah. Versus exactly what you said, like typically we're looking minimum 3 to a 5-year plan. And to your point, like the first thing is really the data acquisition, right? Mm-hmm. Can't make a decision without it. So I love it.
If you're fully insured, you're not getting much data anyway.
Yeah.
And if you do, it's masked and it's telling a story that might not even be yours.
Yeah, it's so bad.
I know. So if there's HRs out there that are listening that are like, man, she's impressive, which I'm sure there are because you are. But how do they, go from being HR to a strategist? Like that, there's obviously a gap there. What's the best way for them to fill it?
So it's going to sound silly, but kind of fake it till you make it a little bit, right? Mm-hmm. I did this. Do you know what Disrupt HR is? Mm-hmm. So I did this little 5-minute speech at Disrupt HR a couple of weeks ago called The Art of Gaining Power. And yes, it's a competition. Mm-hmm. So I think part of it is you have to assume power, right? And if you don't have it currently in your role as an HR partner, get it. Just start faking it like you have it, right? Assume that you have that power and become more assertive in a lot of ways, so that you can make them, the leaders understand kind of where you're coming from, but also lead with data. Yes. Right. Don't just do it and do it just for doing its sake, lead with data, find out where are you, what are the things that you can do, whether it's on the benefits side or the people side. Again, go back to that exit interview. If you want to talk about adding in an onboarding plan or a training and development, something like that, figure out how you can throw that into the business plan of the organization. But if you don't know what the business plan is, it's going to be tough too. So you got to figure that out. And so asking the right people, if you don't have a seat with, say, the CEO, start somewhere else, right? Is there a general manager, vice presidents, whoever? Make sure that you're building those relationships to really understand the business. Mm-hmm. And then go back and think, how do I use the people in our organization, the human capital, to help get to those business goals? Maybe it is benefits. Maybe we're giving something that nobody is using, nobody cares about, but it's costing us $100,000 a year. Make the recommendation that, hey, we're going to change this year because of A, B, C, and D. But again, I think leading with data is going to be super helpful. And then tying it to a business goal.
I love it. And that's actually so tangible. And something that, I used to, when we first opened our business, I listened to a lot of HR talks and did a lot of reading. And a lot of the times everything felt so high level. It was like, well, just develop your people. Just have a good culture. Have a culture of feedback and accountability with your staff. And I remember sitting there and being like, okay, all of that sounds super cool, but like, how the heck do I do it? Mm-hmm. And I just appreciate the tangible aspect of what you're saying. So thank you for being like actionable. That's always appreciated, especially on a podcast, Yeah. So maybe a little bit of a controversial question. Do you feel like because a lot of HR are females, that maybe that is an inherent disadvantage already in the power dynamic within an executive team? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Do I feel like females are at a disadvantage?
Yeah.
Of course I do.
Okay. I do too, but I didn't want to lead you in case you didn't.
Of course I do.
I think that's part of the struggle.
I think that's a struggle. I mean,
Yeah.
I think we've come a long way. So there's definitely that too. But I will tell you, back in my early days of recruiting, there would be a male and a female, and we'd present that to a client back in the days, and they could have exactly the same profiles, but they would offer that male more money every time, right? I don't think it's to anybody's fault. They're just, there's this unconscious bias that actually still exists. So, unfortunately, sometimes you have to work harder than your male counterpart sitting next to you in order to get that same, visualization. Unless you're working with a company that, again, is, they're not that functioned. It's tough, but of course I still see it.
Yeah.
I'd love to say that I didn't.
Yeah.
I'm hoping my daughter doesn't.
There you go. Ooh, I like that. Me too. Let's get to the mergers and acquisitions, because I've been excited to have this conversation.
Yeah.
So a company is considering acquiring another company. At what point do you usually get brought in? Is it pre-sale, like way, way, way before? Are they in the planning stages?
So me personally, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Lots of HR partners don't.
Right.
They're brought in, after they've already done some sort of diligence.
Makes no sense.
And it doesn't make a lot of sense. Even PE firms now have started to really recognize the human capital side.
Good.
There's lots, especially your larger ones, have internal human capital partners now. And they didn't have that, call it 5 to 10 years ago at all. But in an organization, of course, the human resources person should be brought on soon, even if you're not doing the diligence part. So what I have seen in a lot of PE partners, they'll bring in, call it Willis Towers Watson, right? Some large, benefits conglomerate firm, and they're going to do the diligence. And they think that's the HR diligence. That's just not diligence. Again,
right.
The price of admission diligence, sure, right? They have benefits, they pay people correctly. It's the basic kind of stuff. It's not thinking about really the human capital side of it. So in my experience, I have had good experiences where I was brought in, even interviewing and looking at companies to say, is this something we even want to look at? Do we want to purchase this firm? Is it going to match with us from a cultural standpoint? Does their business align with what we do? Does it make sense? How will they fit in? So I've been lucky from that side. And then you do that analysis from a human capital perspective too. Yes, you've got to pay people. They need to know how they're going to get paid, when they're going to get paid, what's their benefits going to look like post-close. You've got to do all that stuff. But that, again, is checking off that box part of it. But when you really put the time and effort into who they are and what's going to be beneficial for them coming on board, you'll see huge returns. I mean, the several I've been involved in was almost zero turnover in every one during the last ones.
Wow.
But that's because we put so much effort in the front end to understand if, there's a person coming on board that they know that they're coming to a bigger company, which isn't a takeaway for them, right? Their title might change to a lower title because in a bigger firm, it means something different, right? But now the opportunity is much larger than what they would have had previously. But you have to explain that to people. Nobody likes change. So taking the time to do that, in my experience, has been hugely beneficial. And it's not just me from an HR standpoint. It's really the entire leadership team has to get on board with that. Because everybody's got to be having the same types of conversations.
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah, we're doing one now. And we kind of kept asking to get involved sooner. And getting involved later kind of brought up some issues. Like if for any company thinking of acquiring, like it is important to know, to what we were talking about earlier, they're on a healthcare plan where they have no data.
Yeah.
And then I go and put these people on their plan, right? Suddenly we get priced up like 34%. And like I would have known that going in,
Yeah.
So I'm like, all right, next one, you got to bring me in a little bit sooner because we can kind of underwrite this before getting there and get you guys the decrements on the price if you need it, because we don't know where the costs are going to be.
Or if you knew it was going to be bad, you could make a decision on the front end to keep, the entities somewhat separate. They could have a separate plan for a year if you needed to do that, right? It's not always ideal, but if you needed to, you make those business decisions here versus then knowing that later on it's going to be an issue.
Absolutely. What do you think is your ethos? Like, is there a kind of guiding why, a principle that's like carried you through all of these amazing things that you've done?
I think it's really how businesses run more effectively with the right people. I have seen it where it doesn't, because we just hired whoever we could hire. And that's not sustainable. It's not successful, and it'll destroy a company from the inside out. But when you really put the effort in to make sure that who you're bringing on and on what teams, and those teams are working effectively together, that's what gets me excited.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever read the book, The Advantage?
Mm-mm.
You know, the 7 dysfunctions of a team or 5
Yes.
dysfunctions. So same guy, he wrote this book called The Advantage. And part of his book is saying that an executive team should only care about each other. So what happens in a lot of companies is you've got sales over here, operations, different people sitting around the table. Well, each of those people are like covering their own stuff,
Yes.
right? They're protecting. And so they come to those meetings, not for the greater part of the
Not
company and the
collaborating.
collaboration. It's because they want to make sure that this is bringing up and it's being covered. I say from a human capital perspective, the nice part about having HR at that seat, if you will, is that they're not protecting anything. They're protecting the company, right?
Mm-hmm.
Their whole objective is to make this part of it work. But the book says once you can get those people at that team only being protective of each other, how much further a company could go. And I, again, have seen that. And that's what I love to see is once you can do that, then, you could get all the people aligned behind you. It just makes perfect sense. And a company's profitability is drastically increased. Happy employees are more profitable employees.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
That's amazing. Our listeners, if they want to find you somewhere, where can they find you?
Of course, LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Personally on LinkedIn, Redbrick on LinkedIn, and then my website, redbrick.com.
Do you feel like
Redbrick
there's
Insights.
Redbrick Insights?
Yeah.
Is there, so I know obviously there's the human capital strategy. What do you see Redbrick Insights doing differently in the next 5-10 years, if anything?
Yeah, I want to continue to grow and build. So I have a couple of people on my team now, but I'd love to continue adding consultants. And part of my structure and how I'm looking at adding people, and the ones that I do work with now, are they're similar backgrounds as me.
Mm-hmm.
They've lived in HR for multiple years. They've not lived in one section of HR. They understand the different facets and how they work together. And so bringing more of that to an organization is kind of where I want to go with it. Continuing to, bring the full parts of it, not just one area of focus.
I have no doubt that you will do it. So thank you so much. It was such a pleasure having you on today.